The heavy mahogany doors of the Obsidian Holdings boardroom didn't just close. They sealed a fate. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of expensive cologne, stale espresso, and the devastating metallic tang of absolute betrayal. Rain lashed violently against the floor-to-ceiling glass windows overlooking the glittering, unforgiving skyline of Chicago, mirroring the storm tearing through Ellen's chest. She stood frozen, her fingers gripping the edge of the polished marble table so tightly her knuckles bled white. Every eye in the room, members of the elite board, high-profile investors, and the predatory, judgmental glare of the prestigious Brody family, was pinned on her. They looked at her not as the brilliant strategic mind who had pulled their company back from the brink of bankruptcy over 3 agonizing years, but as a common thief. A social climber caught red-handed. At the head of the table stood Logan Brody. His tall, imposing frame was silhouetted against the dark sky, his jaw clenched so hard a muscle ticked violently beneath his flawless skin. His dark eyes, which had looked at her with unspoken tenderness in the quiet, late-night hours of the office just weeks ago, were now dead, frozen over with absolute disdain. "You thought you could trap me, Ellen?" Logan's voice wasn't loud, but it carried the terrifying, razor-sharp edge of a guillotine. It sliced through the silence of the room, cutting straight into her soul. He tossed a white envelope onto the center of the table. It slid across the glossy surface and stopped right before her. Inside was the positive ultrasound image she had, naive, terrified and hopeful, brought to his office only an hour prior. "You thought a calculated pregnancy would secure you a permanent seat at my table? A lifetime guarantee to the Brody fortune?" "Logan, please. Just listen to me," Ellen whispered, her voice trembling, though she fought with every ounce of her dignity to keep her tears from falling. She placed a hand instinctively over her still flat stomach, protecting the microscopic heartbeat growing inside her. "It wasn't planned. I don't want your money. I never cared about the fortune. I love you." A cruel, mocking laugh erupted from Victoria Brody, Logan's mother, who sat draped in diamonds at the right flank of the table. "Love? How cliché. You're an assistant, darling. A disposable employee from nothing. You saw an opening in my son's bed and you took it to elevate your pathetic status. Logan, throw this parasite out before she leaks this to the press." Logan didn't blink. The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating, as he stared down at the woman who had stayed awake with him until 3 a.m. for months, rewriting restructuring proposals, holding his hand when his father passed, and loving him without demanding a single thing in return. But the deeply ingrained paranoia of his billionaire upbringing, fueled by a lifetime of people exploiting him for his wealth, had completely blinded him. He saw only a threat to his empire. "You are stripped of your position effective immediately," Logan declared, his voice devoid of any human warmth. "Your access codes are revoked. If you ever attempt to contact me, my family, or this firm again, my legal team will ensure you spend the rest of your life in a federal penitentiary for extortion. Take whatever pathetic settlement HR gives you and vanish. You are nothing to me, Ellen. Absolutely nothing." The words struck her like physical blows, knocking the wind from her lungs. The sheer, blinding humiliation washed over her as the board members whispered, their sneers cutting deep into her skin. For 3 years she had hidden a monumental truth to protect him, to ensure he never thought she was with him for status. She wasn't just an assistant. She was Ellen Hunt, the sole biological heiress to the global Hunt Enterprises empire, a fortune that made the Brody estate look like a drop in the ocean. She had wanted him to love her, the woman, not her family's staggering power. Now, looking at the monstrous stranger before her, a profound, chilling numbness washed over her heartbreak. The tears stopped. She pulled her hand away from the table, stood up perfectly straight, and looked Logan dead in his cold, dark eyes. "I will leave," Ellen said, her voice suddenly dropping into an eerie, unshakable calm that caused a flicker of unease to cross Logan's face. "And I promise you, Logan, you will get exactly what you just asked for. You will never see me again. But remember this moment. Remember the day you decided your pride was worth more than the truth." She turned on her heel and walked out of the boardroom, her heels clicking defiantly against the marble floor. She didn't pack her desk. She didn't cry in the elevator. She walked straight out into the torrential rain, hailed a cab and made one phone call to her grandfather's personal estate executor. It was time to shed the skin of the humble assistant. It was time to go home. "Hello, my wonderful global family. A truly heartwarming welcome to each and every one of you watching today. I'm so incredibly grateful to have you here with me. Before we dive deeper into this gripping, emotional journey of betrayal, hidden identities, and ultimate redemption, please tell me down in the comments. Where are you watching from today? How are you doing? I love reading about your lives and connecting with you across the miles. If you haven't already joined our amazing community, please take a quick moment right now to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell. Your incredible support keeps this channel alive, allowing me to bring you these intense, deeply emotional stories every single week. Trust me, you do not want to click off this video because what happens next will leave you completely breathless. Let's get back to the story. 6 years later, the grand ballroom of the Drake Hotel in Chicago was a sea of opulence, dripping in crystal chandeliers, high-end champagne, and the crème de la crème of the international business world. The annual Global Commerce Summit was the most prestigious event of the year, a place where multi-billion-dollar mergers were sealed with a handshake. Logan Brody stood near the center of the room, looking sharper than ever in a tailored Tom Ford tuxedo. Over the past 6 years, Brody Holdings had grown into a massive conglomerate, and he was heralded as the undisputed king of the city's concrete jungle. Yet despite his astronomical success, his face was more hardened, his eyes darker and more hollowed out than before. Success felt empty. For 6 years, an phantom ache had resided in his chest, a lingering, frustrating ghost of the woman he had brutally cast aside. He had tried to convince himself he did the right thing, that she was just a con artist. But no matter how many millions he made, he could never wash the memory of Ellen's final, chillingly calm gaze out of his mind. "Logan, have you heard the rumors?" asked Arthur Vance, a senior board member, stepping up beside him with a glass of scotch. The reclusive Hunt Enterprises, the multi-trillion-dollar global empire from Europe, has finally appointed their new global CEO after the old patriarch passed away last year. Rumor has it she's personally attending tonight to scout local acquisitions. If we can land a partnership with Hunt, Brody Holdings becomes untouchable. Logan sipped his drink, his interest piqued. "Do we know anything about her?" The Hunt family has kept their personal lives completely locked down for a generation. "Nothing. No photos, no public interviews. Complete media blackout," Arthur whispered, looking toward the grand entrance. "But the organizers just announced her arrival. She's coming through the doors right now." A sudden sharp hush fell over the entire ballroom. The lively chatter of hundreds of billionaires and socialites died down to an eerie whisper. The massive double doors of the ballroom swung open, and the crowd parted like the Red Sea. Logan turned his gaze toward the entrance, his heart suddenly hammering against his ribs for reasons he couldn't comprehend. Walking into the room, flanked by 4 elite personal security guards, was a woman who radiated pure, unadulterated power, elegance, and staggering beauty. She wore a breathtaking midnight blue silk gown that flowed behind her like a royal train. Her hair was styled in a sophisticated upward sweep, highlighting a flawless, striking jawline and piercing, confident eyes. Logan's breath hitched. The champagne glass in his hand slipped through his fingers, smashing violently against the marble floor, shattering into 1,000 glittering shards. It was Ellen. But it wasn't the quiet, submissive assistant who used to organize his files and endure his mother's snide remarks. This woman walked with the absolute authority of a queen ruling her domain. Her posture was commanding, her aura radiating an icy, untouchable confidence. As if sensing his paralyzed, suffocating gaze, Ellen paused. She turned her head slowly, her eyes sweeping across the crowd until they locked onto Logan. There was no shock in her eyes. No fear. No lingering pain. There was only a devastating, chilling indifference. She looked right through him as if he were nothing more than a microscopic speck of dust on her expensive shoes. But before Logan's brain could even process the reality that his former assistant was the multi-billionaire heiress to the world's largest empire, his eyes traveled downward. Stepping out from behind her silk gown, holding her hand with absolute trust, was a young boy. He was roughly 5 years old, dressed in a miniature tailored tuxedo that matched the elegance of the room. The boy looked up at Ellen, laughing warmly, revealing a pair of deep, strikingly familiar dark eyes, and a sharp, unmistakable dimple on his left cheek. Logan felt all the air leave his lungs. His knees buckled slightly, forcing him to grip the edge of a nearby high-top table to keep from collapsing. The boy was a mirror image of himself. 6 years ago he had rejected a pregnant assistant, assuming she was a penniless fraud trying to ruin him. Now she had returned as his ultimate superior, holding the hand of the son he never knew existed. A child who carried the Brody bloodline but didn't even know his name. Ellen caught Logan's pale, trembling expression. A slow, razor-sharp, elegant smile played on her lips. She gave him a polite, entirely detached nod of her head, completely ignoring his state of absolute shock, before turning away to greet a group of foreign dignitaries who immediately bowed in respect. Logan's world shattered into pieces. The fuse was lit, the past had caught up, and the ultimate reckoning had just walked into the room. The shattering of Logan's glass was entirely drowned out by the collective murmur of awe sweeping through the grand ballroom. To the elite of Chicago, this was the arrival of global royalty, the grand unveiling of the reclusive Hunt Enterprises matriarch. But to Logan the room had completely vanished. The lights, the music, the hundreds of dressed-up bodies all faded into a blurry, out-of-focus background. The only things rendered in sharp, agonizing high definition were Ellen and the little boy standing by her side. Logan's hands shook uncontrollably. He stared at the child's face, tracing the curve of the boy's jaw, the exact texture of his dark, unruly curls, and most damning of all, those deep, intense eyes that matched his own perfectly. A suffocating wave of mathematical realization slammed into his chest. 6 years. She had been gone for exactly 6 years. The boy looked to be around 5. The timeline wasn't just a coincidence. It was an undeniable, absolute truth. The positive ultrasound he had brutally dismissed as a cheap extortion tactic had been real. "Logan? Are you all right? You look like you've seen a ghost," Arthur Vance remarked, looking down at the shattered glass by Logan's feet and then up at his CO's pale face. Logan didn't answer. He couldn't. His throat felt like it was coated in ash. He watched as Ellen gracefully navigated the crowd. Every step she took was a masterclass in executive power. When local billionaires approached her, desperate for a mere moment of her time, she engaged them with a polite, razor-sharp intelligence, her voice smooth and completely devoid of the timid softness he had once taken for granted. She was no longer the girl who quietly brought him his black coffee at 6 a.m., nor the woman who sat silently in the passenger seat of his car, offering a comforting presence after his company lost its biggest defense contract. This Ellen Hunt was a fortress. "Mommy, can I have one of those tiny pastries?" A small, clear voice echoed across the immediate radius. Logan watched as Ellen immediately melted, her icy exterior evaporating into pure, radiant warmth as she looked down at her son. She knelt down, completely unbothered by the fact that her multi-$1,000 silk gown was pooling on the floor, and gently brushed a stray curl from the boy's forehead. "Only if you promise not to get chocolate on your tuxedo, Leo," she murmured, her voice carrying a deep, fiercely protective love that made Logan's chest ache with a violent, hollow pang. "Leo." Logan swallowed hard, the name burning his throat. He felt an overwhelming, instinctive urge to take a step forward, to call out her name, to demand answers, but his feet felt like they were cast in concrete. From across the room, Victoria Brody, Logan's mother, approached the scene. Having noticed the commotion surrounding the Hunt heiress, she pushed her way through the crowd, her face molded into a practiced, sycophantic smile. She hadn't fully looked at Ellen's face yet. She only saw the $1,000,000 name tag. "Ah, Miss Hunt. What an absolute honor it is to have you in Chicago," Victoria gushed, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness as she stepped into Ellen's personal space. "I am Victoria Brody, matriarch of Brody Holdings. We have been so eager to—" Victoria stopped dead in her words. Ellen rose slowly to her full height, turning her gaze directly onto the older woman. The practiced smile on Victoria's face instantly froze, then crumbled into an expression of sheer, unadulterated horror. She gasped, her hand flying to her throat as her eyes darted from Ellen to the little boy standing beside her. "You..." Victoria choked out, her voice dropping to a panicked whisper. "It can't be. You were just a parasite, common thief, a disposable employee from nothing." Ellen filled in the blanks for her, her voice smooth, level, and deadly quiet. She didn't raise her pitch, but the absolute dominance in her tone caused Victoria to visibly flinch. Ellen took a half step forward, shielding Leo slightly behind her. "I believe those were your exact words 6 years ago, Mrs. Brody. How are you the head of Hunt Enterprises?" Victoria stammered, her face turning an ashen gray. You lied to us. You hid who you were. I didn't lie about anything, Ellen replied, a cold, mocking smile playing on her lips. I simply chose to work from the bottom up to learn the industry, using my mother's maiden name. I wanted to see how people would treat me when they thought I had nothing to offer them. And your family showed me exactly who you are. Logan finally broke out of his paralysis, stepping heavily through the crowd until he stood right beside his trembling mother. He looked down at Ellen, his eyes wild with a mixture of shock, profound regret, and an underlying current of desperation. Ellen, Logan choked out, his voice cracking. Ellen turned her head slightly to look at him. Up close, the transformation was even more staggering. There was a fierce, independent fire in her eyes that completely lacked the vulnerability he had used to crush her. She looked at him as if he were a complete stranger, or worse, an insignificant business rival. Mr. Brody, Ellen said, her greeting so formal it felt like an icy blade sliding between his ribs. I would say it's a pleasure, but I prefer to keep my interactions strictly honest. Ellen, please. We need to talk, Logan pleaded, completely ignoring the onlookers who were starting to notice the tension. He looked past her, his eyes locking onto Leo. The boy was staring up at him with wide, curious dark eyes. Eyes that were a perfect genetic duplicate of Logan's own. Is he my? Before Logan could finish the sentence, a tall, strikingly handsome man dressed in a charcoal-gray European suit stepped out of the crowd, placing a warm, possessive hand directly onto the small of Ellen's back. It was Julian Vance, the brilliant, internationally renowned corporate attorney and close confidant to the Hunt family. Is there a problem here, Ellen? Julian asked, his voice deep and commanding as he cast a protective, warning glare at Logan. Leo's face instantly lit up at the sight of Julian. Uncle Julian. Look, I got the pastry. Julian smiled warmly, reaching down to ruffle Leo's hair with a familiarity that made a sudden, violent surge of jealousy erupt deep within Logan's soul. That should be me, a frantic voice inside Logan's head screamed. That is my son. That is my family. No problem at all, Julian, Ellen said softly, her tone completely changing as she addressed the man beside her. She gave Logan one final, entirely indifferent look. We were just leaving. The air in here has become rather stale. Wait. Ellen, you can't just walk away. Logan took a step forward, his hand reaching out instinctively to grab her arm, to stop her from vanishing again. In a flash, two of Ellen's massive security guards stepped into his path, their towering frames blocking him entirely. One of them placed a heavy, unyielding hand firmly against Logan's chest. Sir, step back, the guard warned, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. Logan watched in agonizing, helpless silence as Ellen turned her back on him. She placed her hand in Julian's arm, held Leo's small hand on her other side and walked away. The crowd parted for them once again, leaving Logan standing in the middle of the grand ballroom, surrounded by wealth he no longer cared about, utterly devastated, while his mother gripped his arm in a panic. Logan, we have to do something, Victoria hissed, her voice trembling with malice and fear. That child. If the public finds out, the scandal will ruin our stock price. And she has enough power now to crush Brody Holdings with a single pen stroke. We need to handle this. Logan violently yanked his arm away from his mother's grip, his eyes still fixed on the empty doorway where Ellen had just disappeared. Shut up, mother, Logan growled, his voice shaking with a terrifying rage directed entirely at himself and the woman who had encouraged his worst impulses. Just shut up. Later that night, the rain continued to pour, washing over the sleek concrete of the city. Inside his penthouse apartment, Logan sat in total darkness. A half-empty bottle of expensive bourbon sat on the table before him, completely untouched. He couldn't drink. He couldn't sleep. He couldn't breathe. For 6 years he had lived a lie, telling himself that protecting his company from a perceived gold digger was the mark of a true leader. He had built walls of iron and ice around his heart, a defense mechanism born from a childhood where every friend had an alternative motive and every relationship had a price tag. Ellen had been the only pure, untainted light in his dark world. She had loved him when he was broken, when his father's death had left him spiraling, when the company was on the verge of collapse. She had demanded nothing but his time, his trust, and his love. And he had thrown her out like garbage. He closed his eyes and a single agonizing tear escaped, rolling down his hardened cheek. He remembered the look of sheer broken-hearted humiliation on her face 6 years ago in that boardroom. He remembered how she had placed her hand over her stomach, trying to protect their child from his cruelty. I have a son, Logan thought, the realization ripping through him with the force of a freight train. A beautiful, brilliant son who doesn't even know I exist. A son who calls another man uncle. The pain was unendurable. But beneath the crushing weight of his despair, a fierce, desperate determination began to spark. He didn't care about the Hunt fortune. He didn't care about the stock prices or the family reputation. He wanted his family back. He wanted Ellen to look at him with warmth again, even if he had to spend every single day of the rest of his life bleeding for it. He would tear down his own empire brick by brick if it meant earning her forgiveness. He pulled out his phone and dialed his private investigator, his voice deadpan and urgent. Find out where Ellen Hunt is staying. Find out her schedule for tomorrow. Every single detail. Now. Meanwhile, in the presidential suite of the Four Seasons, the atmosphere was far more serene, yet heavily charged with history. Leo had been tucked into his large plush bed, fast asleep, clutching a stuffed bear. Ellen stood by the window looking out at the city lights. The cold, untouchable CO mask she had worn at the ballroom had vanished, replaced by a quiet, reflective vulnerability. Her hand wrapped around a small diamond pendant hanging from her neck, the only gift Logan had ever given her during their time together, a piece she could never bring herself to throw away, despite the agony attached to it. Julian walked into the room quietly, holding 2 cups of herbal tea. He handed one to her, his eyes filled with deep concern. You handled that better than I expected, Julian said softly. Seeing him again, it couldn't have been easy. Ellen took a slow sip of the tea, her eyes reflecting the distant city lights. I spent 6 years preparing for tonight, Julian. I built a fortress around my life and my son. Seeing Logan tonight didn't hurt me. It just reminded me of the girl I used to be, the girl who begged a monster to believe her. He looked completely destroyed, Ellen, Julian noted gently, playing devil's advocate. He saw Leo. He knows the truth now. You know he won't just let this go. A man like Logan Brody doesn't accept defeat. Ellen turned around, her eyes flashing with a dangerous, multi-billionaire authority that proved she was truly her grandfather's heir. Let him try, Ellen whispered, her voice laced with an unshakable resolve. 6 years ago he had all the power and he used it to break me. Now, the scales have tipped. If Logan Brody wants a war, he can have one. But he will never ever touch my son. The morning sun didn't bring warmth to Chicago. It only exposed the harsh, cold edges of the skyscrapers cutting into the gray sky. By 7 a.m., Logan was already standing outside the exclusive, heavily guarded entrance of the Four Seasons Hotel. He hadn't slept for a single second. His tailored suit was slightly wrinkled, his tie loosened, and his eyes were bloodshot, surrounded by dark circles of pure exhaustion and desperate longing. He was a man possessed, driven by an urgent, frantic rhythm that beat against his ribs like a war drum. His private investigator had confirmed that Ellen had scheduled a high-level acquisition meeting at a private high-end cafe just blocks from her hotel at 8:30 a.m. Logan didn't care about decorum anymore. He didn't care that his sudden presence would create a scene for the paparazzi lurking in the shadows. He needed to hear her voice. He needed to look into her eyes when they weren't shielded by a crowded ballroom. At exactly 8:15 a.m., the glass doors of the hotel slid open. Ellen stepped out, looking devastatingly beautiful in a sharp, tailored white pantsuit, a stark contrast to the dark city. Beside her walked Julian Vance, carrying a leather briefcase, his posture alert and protective. And right between them, holding Ellen's hand and skipping happily, was Leo. The little boy was wearing a bright blue jacket, his small face lit up with absolute innocence as he pointed at a passing fire truck. Seeing his son in the daylight hit Logan like a physical blow. The absolute certainty of their connection was undeniable. Leo had the exact same cowlick in his hair, the same determined stride. Before his mind could form a coherent plan, Logan's legs moved on their own. He stepped out from the shadow of his tinted SUV, striding directly toward them. "Ellen!" Logan called out, his voice raw, cutting through the morning traffic noises. Ellen froze instantly. Her shoulders tensed beneath her white blazer. Beside her, Julian's eyes narrowed into a dangerous glare as he instinctively stepped half a pace forward, placing himself between Logan and the family. "Mommy? Who is that man?" Leo asked, his small voice filled with curiosity as he looked up at the tall, disheveled stranger who was staring at him with wide, tear-filled eyes. Ellen didn't answer her son immediately. She took a deep breath, schooling her features into a mask of pure, absolute ice, and turned to face Logan. "Julian, please take Leo to the car. The Mercedes is right there." "Ellen, I don't think that's a good idea," Julian whispered, his eyes locked onto Logan's erratic, desperate posture. "He's unstable." "It's fine," Ellen commanded, her voice ringing with the absolute authority of a global CEO. "He cannot hurt me anymore. Take Leo. Now." Julian nodded reluctantly. He knelt down, lifting Leo into his arms. As Julian carried him toward the waiting armored vehicle, Leo kept his eyes glued to Logan, waving a small, innocent hand. "Goodbye, mister." The words tore a piece of Logan's heart right out of his chest. "Goodbye, mister." His own son looked at him and saw a stranger. "Ellen, please," Logan choked out, taking another step forward, only for Ellen to raise a single manicured hand, stopping him dead in his tracks. The distance between them was barely 3 feet, yet it felt like a canyon filled with 6 years of unpayable debt. "Do not step any closer to me, Mr. Brody," Ellen warned, her voice dropping into a dangerous, deadly quiet whisper. "And do not ever look at my son like that again." "He's my son too, Ellen." Logan burst out, the truth finally exploding from his lips in a ragged, agonizing gasp. "I know it. Look at him. Look at his eyes. You can't hide him from me. I know I threw away the ultrasound. I know I said unforgivable, monstrous things. But he is my blood. You lied to me." "I never lied to you." Ellen snapped back, her composure cracking for the very first time, revealing the roaring furnace of pain and fury burning beneath her elegant surface. She stepped closer, her eyes flashing like lightning. "I walked into your office 6 years ago, terrified, vulnerable, and completely in love with you. I placed that ultrasound on your desk because I wanted to build a life with you. And what did you do, Logan? You let your aristocratic mother call me a parasite. You accused me of extortion. You threatened to throw me in prison. You cast me out into a thunderstorm without a single shred of humanity. I was blind." Logan cried out, tears finally streaming openly down his face, completely unbothered by the fact that he, the most powerful billionaire in Chicago, was weeping on a public sidewalk. "My whole life people used me for my money. My father taught me that everyone has a price tag. I thought it was a trap. The moment you left, my world started dying, Ellen. I haven't slept a full night in 6 years. Please, let me make it right. I will give you everything. I will give him my name, my fortune, my life." Ellen let out a cold, mocking laugh that sounded like breaking glass. "Your fortune." She stepped even closer, her aura completely suffocating his desperate pleas. "Logan, look at me. I am the sole head of Hunt Enterprises. My grandfather left me an empire that dwarfs yours 10 times over. I don't need your money. I don't need your name. My son is a Hunt. He will inherit the world without ever needing a single cent from the Brody estate. You have nothing to offer us." Logan felt his knees go weak. The realization slammed into him with absolute clarity. The defense mechanism he had used his entire life, his wealth, his power, was completely useless against the woman he had wronged. He was entirely stripped of his armor. But before he could beg further, the central challenge of their shared past slammed into the present. A sleek, black motorcycle with no license plates suddenly roared onto the sidewalk from around the corner, its engine revving violently. The rider, dressed entirely in black with a tinted helmet, didn't slow down. He accelerated straight toward Ellen. Logan's predatory instincts, honed by years of handling high-stakes corporate threats, kicked in a fraction of a second before anyone else realized what was happening. He didn't look at the bike. He looked at Ellen, who was frozen in shock as the vehicle barreled toward her. "Ellen, move!" Logan roared. He launched his body forward, wrapping his powerful arms around her waist and twisting his torso. He threw her forcefully onto the manicured lawn of the hotel plaza, using his own back as a human shield. Crash! The motorcycle clipped Logan's shoulder and hip with immense force, sending him spinning through the air before he slammed violently against the concrete steps of the hotel. The motorcycle didn't stop. The rider swerved back onto the street, speeding away into the chaotic Chicago traffic, leaving behind a cloud of burning rubber and absolute terror. "Logan!" Ellen gasped, pushing herself up from the grass. Her pristine white suit was stained with dirt and grass, but she was completely uninjured. Logan lay on the concrete, gasping for air, his right shoulder completely dislocated and blood pooling from a deep gash on his forehead. The pain was blinding, white-hot and suffocating. Yet through the haze of agony, his eyes frantically searched the plaza until they landed on her. Seeing that she was breathing, that she was safe, a weak, bloody smile formed on his lips. Are you hurt?" Logan whispered, his voice fading as darkness threatened to pull him under. Julian came sprinting back from the car, his face pale with horror, while hotel security guards flooded the plaza, shouting into their radios. Julian immediately knelt beside Ellen, checking her over. "Ellen, are you okay? Did it hit you?" "I'm fine." Logan blocked it, Ellen stammered, her voice trembling violently as she stared down at the bleeding billionaire at her feet. For a split second, the cold CEO mask completely vanished, replaced by the terrified, empathetic girl who had loved him 6 years ago. She reached out a shaking hand toward him, but stopped herself just inches from his bloody face. "Sir, stay still. An ambulance is on the way," a security guard shouted, kneeling beside Logan. As Logan's vision began to blur into absolute darkness, he reached out with his left hand, his fingers barely brushing against the hem of Ellen's stained pantsuit. Don't let them hurt Leo." Logan wheezed out, his final breath before unconsciousness took him. "They're coming. For him." The words sent a chilling wave of pure terror straight into Ellen's soul. This wasn't a random traffic accident. It was a targeted strike. And as the distant wail of sirens began to echo through the city streets, Ellen realized with absolute horror that her return to Chicago hadn't just reawakened old romantic ghosts. It had placed a massive, deadly target right on her son's back. "My beautiful friends, the intensity has just reached a boiling point." Logan just threw his own body in front of danger to save Ellen, proving that his regret isn't just words, it's absolute action. But who is targeting them? Who wants to hurt this family? The sterilizing scent of antiseptic, rubbing alcohol, and cold plastic hung heavy in the air of the private wing at Northwestern Memorial Hospital. The rhythmic, monotonous beep, beep, beep of the heart monitor was the only sound breaking the suffocating silence of the room. Outside, a wall of 4 elite Hunt Enterprises security guards stood like iron statues, ensuring that not a single soul, not even the hospital's top board members, could enter without explicit clearance. Logan lay in the center of the bed, his broad chest wrapped tightly in surgical bandages, his right shoulder relocated and immobilized by a heavy brace. A neat line of black stitches traced the edge of his left temple, where the concrete steps had cut deep into his skull. His face was pale, his breathing shallow, yet his jaw remained tightly clenched even in his medically induced sleep. Sitting in a sleek leather armchair in the corner of the dim room, Ellen watched him. She had refused to change out of her dirt-stained white pantsuit, ignoring Julian's repeated pleas for her to return to the penthouse suite and rest. Her hands were folded tightly in her lap, her eyes fixed on the man who had brutally shattered her life 6 years ago, only to throw his own body into the jaws of death to shield her this morning. The door clicked open softly. Julian walked in, his face grim, holding a secure encrypted tablet. He closed the door behind him and stepped quietly to Ellen's side, casting a cold, calculating look at the unconscious billionaire on the bed. "The police are treating it as a hit and run, but our internal intelligence team just extracted the traffic camera data from the intersection," Julian whispered, his voice laced with deep concern. "The motorcycle had a cloned license plate. The rider was waiting in an alleyway for exactly 42 minutes before you stepped out of the hotel. He wasn't tracking a random target, Ellen. He was waiting for you. Or worse, he was looking for Leo." Ellen's grip on her own fingers tightened until her nails turned white. A violent shudder went through her, but she forced her voice to remain entirely steady. "What about the Brody family? Is it possible Victoria is trying to eliminate the threat to her family stock? We are monitoring her accounts, but right now Victoria is in a state of absolute panic. She's locked herself in her estate," Julian replied, sliding a finger across the screen of the tablet to reveal a map of Chicago's shipping yards. But there's something else. Before Logan lost consciousness, he whispered to you. He said, they're coming for him. He knew something, Ellen. He knew someone was planning an attack. Ellen stood up, her silk suit rustling as she walked over to the edge of Logan's bed. She looked down at his face, the hard lines of his features softened only by the vulnerability of his injuries. The anger she had carefully cultivated for 6 long years was suddenly warring with a terrifying, suffocating emotion. Hope. She had sworn to hate him forever. She had sworn that he was a monster who cared only for status and wealth. Yet, when the motorcycle had accelerated toward her, Logan hadn't hesitated for a millisecond. He hadn't thought about his fortune, his reputation, or his mother's pride. He had simply jumped. Suddenly, Logan's chest rose sharply. A ragged, painful gasp tore from his throat as his dark eyes flew open. He thrashed slightly against the mattress, his left hand immediately reaching out wildly into the empty air, his fingers clawing for something to hold onto. Ellen. Ellen, he choked out, his voice raw, frantic, and filled with a primal terror. I'm here, Logan. Stay still, you're going to tear your stitches, Ellen said firmly, stepping forward and instinctively catching his flailing hand in both of her own. The moment his rough, burning palm made contact with her smooth skin, Logan's entire body went rigid. He turned his head slowly, his bloodshot eyes locking onto hers. The sheer, overwhelming relief that washed over his face was so profound, so entirely authentic, that it made Ellen's breath hitch. He squeezed her hands with whatever little strength he had left, refusing to let go. You're safe, Logan wheezed, a tear sliding from the corner of his eye, mixing with the dried blood near his temple. Thank God you're safe. Why did you do it, Logan? Ellen asked, her voice cracking slightly, dropping the ICCO persona entirely. You could have been killed. Why would you risk your life for an assistant you threw out like trash? Because you were never just an assistant to me, Ellen, Logan whispered, his voice trembling with a deep, agonizing sincerity that vibrated through the quiet room. I was a coward. I let my paranoia and my mother's poison convince me that the only pure thing in my life was a lie. I have spent 6 years living in an absolute wasteland of my own making. The moment I saw that bike, my brain didn't think. My heart did. If I had to die so that you and our son could live, I would have done it 1,000 times over. Julian stepped forward, his expression hardened, breaking the intense, vulnerable connection between them. Save the poetry for later, Brody. If you want to prove you actually care about Ellen and the boy, tell us what you meant right before you blacked out. Who is targeting them? Logan's face instantly darkened, the vulnerable lover transforming back into the ruthless billionaire who knew the underbelly of corporate warfare. He tried to sit up, groaning through his teeth as his dislocated shoulder protested violently. It's Thomas Croft, Logan growled, his breath coming in short, sharp bursts. The CEO of Croft International. For the past 3 years he's been trying to force a hostile takeover of Brody Holdings. I blocked him at every turn. But last week, my intelligence team intercepted an encrypted communication between Croft and a shadow shell company in Europe. Croft found out that Hunt Enterprises was coming to Chicago to acquire local firms. He knew that if I landed a partnership with you, he would be ruined. Ellen's eyes narrowed into dangerous slits. So he wanted to eliminate me to stop the acquisition? No, Logan said, his voice dropping into a terrifyingly grave register as he stared directly into Ellen's eyes. Croft didn't know who the Hunt heiress was until last night at the ballroom. He saw us talking. He saw my mother's reaction. And he saw Leo. Croft is a psychopath, Ellen. He realizes that Leo is the sole biological heir to both the Brody fortune and the Hunt trillion-dollar empire. He doesn't want to kill you. He wants to leverage you. If he takes Leo, he controls both of our companies. The motorcycle this morning wasn't meant to run you over. It was a distraction to split your security so they could grab the boy. A sudden, paralyzing shock wave of pure adrenaline crashed through Ellen's system. Her phone inside her blazer pocket began to vibrate violently with a high-priority encryption ringtone. It was the security team guarding the presidential suite at the hotel. With shaking fingers, Ellen pressed the answer button and put it on speakerphone. Report, she commanded, her voice dropping an octave. Ma'am, we have a code black. The security chief's frantic voice exploded through the room. accompanied by the distant sound of shattering glass and tactical gunfire over the line. The hotel perimeter has been breached by a heavily armed tactical squad. They used smoke grenades and bypassed the main elevators. We are pulling young Master Leo into the panic room right now, but they have blocked our extraction routes. We need immediate reinforcement. No! Ellen screamed, her world violently tilting on its axis as pure, unadulterated motherly terror took hold of her soul. Hold them off. Protect my son. The line went completely dead, replaced by the horrific hiss of static. Ellen dropped the phone, her knees buckling as she began to spiral into absolute panic. But before she could collapse, Logan violently ripped the 4-line out of his left arm, ignoring the blood that began to spurt onto the white sheets. He swung his legs over the side of the hospital bed, his face twisted in white-hot fury and determination. Julian, get my clothes and call my private security chopper to the hospital roof right now. Logan roared, the sheer command in his voice echoing like thunder, completely shattering his physical weakness. He stepped flat onto the cold floor, standing tall despite his fractured ribs, and grabbed Ellen gently but firmly by her shoulders, forcing her to look into his fiercely protective eyes. Logan, you're bleeding, you can't walk, Ellen sobbed, her heart breaking from the terror of losing her child. I don't care if my heart stops beating today, Ellen, Logan said, his voice dropping into a deadly, unshakable vow. They have our son. We are going to get him back together. I threw him away once before and I will die before I let anyone take him from us again. Trust me, Ellen. Just this once. Trust me. Looking into his eyes, seeing the raw, unyielding love and absolute ferocity of a father ready to tear the world apart for his child, Ellen felt a profound chemical shift inside her heart. The fortress she had built against him crumbled into dust. She didn't see the billionaire who had rejected her. She saw the man who was willing to bleed to death to protect their bloodline. I trust you, Ellen whispered, her tears drying instantly as her own ruthless executive power returned tenfold. Let's go get our boy. My incredible viewers, the stakes have officially turned into a matter of absolute life and death. Leo is trapped, an enemy tycoon is closing in, and Logan has literally ripped himself out of a hospital bed to fight alongside Ellen as a father. The private security helicopter tore through the stormy Chicago sky, its rotors thumping a violent, frantic rhythm against the low-hanging rain clouds. Inside the vibrating cabin, the atmosphere was thick with adrenaline and a suffocating, terrifying urgency. Logan sat rigidly, his left hand gripping a tactical tablet tightly while a private paramedic hurriedly wrapped a fresh, tight compression bandage over his bleeding forewound and dislocated shoulder. He didn't flinch once. The physical agony racking his body was completely muted by the white-hot panic screaming through his veins. Ellen sat directly across from him, her eyes glued to the real-time thermal security feed of her hotel suite, which was streaming onto her own screen. Beside her, Julian Vance was barking furious commands into an encrypted satellite radio, mobilizing every asset Hunt Enterprises had on American soil. The tactical squad inside the hotel isn't using standard mercenary gear, Julian reported, turning to Ellen with a pale, hardened face. They're using military-grade signal jammers. The local police department received 3 false active shooter reports in different sectors of the city at the exact same time, pulling their response teams away. This is highly coordinated. Croft has deep state assets. I don't care if he has an entire army, Logan growled, his voice a low, animalistic rumble that caused the paramedic to step back. He looked over at Ellen, his dark eyes ablaze with a fierce, unyielding intensity. My men just breached the hotel lobby from the ground floor. We are descending onto the helipad in exactly 60 seconds. Ellen, look at the thermal feed on your screen. The northwest corner of the penthouse. Ellen's heart skipped a beat. She zoomed in on the flashing red indicators. The thermal imaging showed 5 heat signatures huddled inside the hidden panic room behind her master closet. But on the outside of the reinforced steel door, 3 other heat signatures were mounting a heavy thermal lance breaching device. They were melting through the locking mechanism. They're going to get him, Ellen whispered, a cold, paralyzing dread washing over her. In less than 3 minutes they'll be inside. Not while I'm still breathing, Logan vowed. The helicopter banked sharply, dropping out of the clouds and slamming down onto the wet concrete of the Four Seasons helipad. Before the skids could even settle, Logan threw the sliding door open, ignoring the violent gust of wind and rain that whipped into the cabin. He leaped out onto the roof, his long strides breaking into a dead sprint toward the maintenance door, with Ellen and Julian hot on his heels, flanked by 6 heavily armed hunt security operators. They flew down the concrete stairwell, throwing open the heavy fire doors that led directly into the expansive multi-million-dollar presidential suite. The air inside was completely choked with white chemical smoke and the acrid stench of flashbang grenades. 2 of Ellen's guard details lay unconscious near the foyer, bleeding but alive. "Clear the rooms. Move," Logan commanded, drawing a sleek tactical sidearm with his left hand, his face twisted in a mask of absolute fury. The hunt security operators moved like a well-oiled machine, sweeping through the grand living room. Suddenly, 2 masked mercenary gunmen emerged from the master hallway, their weapons raised. Before they could pull their triggers, Logan fired 2 blindingly fast shots, dropping them both instantly to the floor, neutralized. He didn't hesitate. He strode over their fallen bodies, his boots splashing through shattered glass, his mind entirely focused on the closet door at the end of the hall. Ellen sprinted past him, her heart hammering against her ribs. They reached the master suite just as the primary breaching mercenary was about to detonate the final charge on the panic room door. "Get away from my son," Ellen roared. With a level of combat precision she had secretly trained for during her years in hiding, Ellen raised her own compact weapon and fired, striking the breacher in the shoulder, sending him crashing into the wall. The remaining 2 mercenaries turned to engage, but Logan and the hunt operators flooded the room, overwhelming them within seconds, forcing them to the ground in handcuffs. The immediate danger was neutralized. The hallway fell into a tense, heavy silence, broken only by the hiss of the dying thermal lance. Ellen threw herself against the scorched steel door of the panic room, her hands frantically typing the biometric release code into the damaged, smoking keypad. "Leo. It's Mommy. Open the door, baby. Open the door." The heavy steel mechanism groaned, clicking loudly before the massive door slowly slid outward. Inside the dimly lit, fortified space, huddled in the far corner behind a mattress, was the head security guard, his weapon drawn. And tucked safely beneath his heavy tactical vest, clutching his stuffed bear with wide, tear-filled eyes, was Leo. "Mommy!" Leo screamed, his little voice breaking as he scrambled out from the guard's protection. Ellen dropped to her knees, burying her face into her son's small shoulder as she pulled him into a desperate, crushing embrace. She wept openly, her entire body shaking with the sheer, overwhelming relief of holding her child again. "I'm here, baby. I've got you. You're safe. Mommy's here." Logan stood at the threshold of the panic room, his weapon dropping to his side. He leaned heavily against the doorframe, his breath catching in his throat as he watched the reunion. A wave of profound, humbling emotion washed over him, a mixture of intense love, unpayable debt, and a deep, agonizing awareness of how close he had come to losing everything. Leo looked up over his mother's shoulder, his wide, dark eyes instantly locking onto Logan. The little boy noticed the fresh blood dripping down Logan's temple, the heavy brace on his shoulder, and the ragged, exhausted state of the tall man who had saved him. "Mr. You're boo-booed," Leo whispered softly, pointing a small, trembling finger at Logan's face. Logan let out a wet, breathless laugh, a fresh tear cutting through the dust and blood on his cheek. He slowly sank to one knee, lowering himself to the boy's eye level, keeping his distance so as not to frighten him. "I'm okay, buddy. Just a little scratch. As long as you're safe, nothing else hurts." Leo looked at his mother, then back at Logan, a strange, instinctual sense of recognition shifting in his innocent eyes. "Did you fight the bad guys for us?" "I will always fight for you, Leo," Logan said, his voice dropping into a thick, emotional whisper, his heart breaking because he couldn't yet tell the boy the full truth. "Always." But the tender moment was violently shattered. Julian, who had been interrogating the leader of the captured mercenaries in the hallway, walked into the bedroom. His face was entirely devoid of color, his hands shaking as he held his phone. He looked at Ellen, then at Logan with an expression of pure, unadulterated horror. "Ellen. Logan, we have a catastrophic problem," Julian stammered, his voice laced with absolute dread. "What is it, Julian?" "Croft's men are neutralized," Ellen said, standing up and pulling Leo protectively against her hip. "This tactical squad wasn't sent by Thomas Croft," Julian revealed, the words dropping like a multi-megaton bomb into the center of the room. We just ran the biometrics on the leader. These men belong to a high-end black-market private military firm contracted directly out of Switzerland. And the wire transfer funding this entire kidnapping attempt didn't come from Croft International. Logan's eyes narrowed into fierce, dangerous slits. Then who paid them? Julian swallowed hard, looking directly at Logan with deep pity and absolute disgust. The funding account belongs to a shell company wholly owned and operated by Brody Holdings. Logan, it was your mother. Victoria Brody authorized the extraction. She didn't want to leverage Leo against you. The contract explicitly states that once the boy was captured, he was to be taken to a remote estate in Europe, and his identity was to be permanently erased. She was going to hide your son from you forever to protect the family stock from a bastard lineage scandal. The silence that followed was absolute, heavy, and completely suffocating. Logan felt the ground completely vanish from beneath his feet. The betrayal didn't just cut deep. It tore his entire reality into bloody, unrecognizable shreds. His own mother. The woman who had raised him, the woman who had poisoned his mind 6 years ago to throw Ellen out of his life, had just tried to steal his only son, to erase his flesh and blood from existence, all for the sake of a corporate balance sheet. Ellen turned her head slowly to look at Logan, her eyes flashing with a sudden, devastating mixture of cold fury and profound, unutterable heartbreak. The fragile bond of trust they had just forged in the fire of the attack instantly froze over. Your family, Ellen whispered, her voice dropping into a terrifyingly quiet, razor-sharp hiss that cut Logan deeper than any blade. She stepped back, holding Leo tightly, shielding him entirely from Logan's reach. 6 years ago your mother called my baby a parasite and you threw me out. And today, your family tries to steal him from my arms. You told me you wanted to protect us, Logan. But the greatest danger to my son is you and your bloodline. Ellen, no. I swear to you I didn't know. Logan cried out, taking a frantic step forward, his hand reaching out in absolute desperation as his world collapsed around him. I will destroy her for this. I will send my own mother to prison for the rest of her life. Please, Ellen, don't do this. Get out, Ellen commanded, her voice ringing with an untouchable absolute finality. She looked at her security guards, her eyes dead and cold. Remove Mr. Brody from my sight. If he or anyone carrying the Brody name ever comes within a mile of my son again, I will use the entire multi-trillion-dollar weight of Hunt Enterprises to erase Brody Holdings from the face of the earth. Go. The Hunt operators immediately stepped forward, their weapons raised, forming an impenetrable wall of steel between Logan and his family. Logan stood frozen, his chest heaving, blood leaking from his wounds, utterly devastated. He looked at Ellen, whose face was a mask of unyielding stone, and then at Leo, who was crying, confused by the sudden anger in the room. Logan realized with a sickening, hollow despair that his mother's monstrous actions had just delivered the ultimate fatal blow to his chances of redemption. He hadn't just lost the war. He had been utterly exiled from the only paradise he had ever known. My beautiful global family, the ultimate betrayal has officially been uncovered, and it came from inside Logan's own bloodline. His own mother has shattered his entire universe, and now Ellen has completely shut him out, viewing him as the ultimate danger to Leo. The storm outside the hotel didn't just linger. It grew into a torrential deluge, drowning the Chicago skyline in a miserable gray twilight. But the tempest raging outside was nothing compared to the absolute winter that had settled into Logan's soul. He was escorted out of the Four Seasons by a phalanx of silent, heavily armed Hunt security operators. They didn't push him, but their presence was an absolute boundary. He was a biohazard in their eyes, a carrier of the Brody infection that had almost cost them their young master. Logan walked through the lobby, his boots dragging against the polished marble. He didn't care about the blood dripping from his freshly ruptured stitches, nor did he feel the sickening crunch of his dislocated shoulder shifting within its brace. He walked like a corpse animated only by a lingering, agonizing memory. When he reached the street, the cold rain hit him, washing the dirt and crimson streaks from his face, but it couldn't cleanse the sickening truth from his mind. My mother. He climbed into the back of his tinted SUV, his face a pale, static mask of pure horror. Julian's words played on a loop inside his skull, each repetition a jagged blade carving out what little humanity he had left. His mother hadn't just encouraged him to cast Ellen aside 6 years ago. She had actively sought to erase his son from the earth. All for the sake of the Brody name. All for the stock price. "Sir?" His driver, a loyal ex-military man named Vance, asked quietly, looking at Logan through the rearview mirror with deep concern. "Where to?" "The hospital." "The estate," Logan growled. His voice didn't sound human. It was a low, guttural vibration, stripped of all warmth, all mercy and all fear. "Drive to my mother's estate. Now." The Brody family mansion in Lake Forest was an imposing fortress of limestone and iron, hidden behind a dense forest of manicured oaks. Tonight, the grand gates were locked tight and private security guards patrolled the perimeter with guard dogs. They had been instructed to let no one in. But they hadn't accounted for the sheer, unyielding fury of the man who owned the very ground they stood on. Logan's heavy SUV didn't slow down as it approached the wrought iron gates. Vance, following his employer's unspoken, deadly vibe, slammed his foot onto the accelerator. The reinforced steel bumper of the SUV hit the gates at 40 miles per hour, sending a horrific scream of tearing metal echoing through the quiet neighborhood. The gates burst open, flying off their hinges as the vehicle roared up the long, winding driveway, tearing through the pristine lawns before slamming to a halt right at the front double doors. Logan didn't wait for Vance to open his door. He threw it open himself, stepping out into the pouring rain. He strode up the stone steps and kicked the massive oak doors with his heavy boot, shattering the intricate electronic lock. Inside, the grand foyer was brightly lit, but it felt like a mausoleum. Victoria Brody stood at the top of the sweeping marble staircase, draped in a white silk robe, clutching a glass of crystal-clear gin. Her face was already a mask of panicked calculation. She had heard the crash. She knew the extraction had failed. "Logan?" Victoria gasped, her voice trembling despite her best efforts to maintain her aristocratic poise. "What is the meaning of this? You are bleeding. You look like a madman. Have you lost your mind?" Logan didn't say a word. He walked up the stairs, his heavy steps echoing like the ticking of a doomsday clock. With every step he took, the sheer, suffocating weight of his presence made Victoria back away until her spine hit the reinforced glass balcony railing. He stopped just 2 feet from her. Close, the sight of him was terrifying. His suit was torn, his bandages were soaked in blackening blood, and his eyes were completely dead, devoid of a single shred of filial love. "You tried to take him," Logan whispered. The quietness of his voice was far more terrifying than a roar. It carried the absolute finality of a death sentence. "Logan, listen to me," Victoria stammered, her face turning an ashen, translucent gray as she dropped her glass. It shattered on the marble, splashing gin over her expensive slippers. "I did it for you. I did it for the family. That girl is a viper. She hid who she was for 6 years. And now she returns with a child looking to humiliate us. If the media found out you had a bastard son with a former employee, the board would have ousted you. The Brody name would have been dragged through the mud. I was protecting our legacy." "Our legacy?" Logan let out a short, terrifying bark of a laugh that made Victoria flinch. He leaned in, his bloody face inches from hers, his breath hot and ragged. "He's my son, Mother. My flesh. My blood. The only pure, untainted thing I have ever created in this miserable, greedy world. And you tried to lock him in a cage and erase his name. He is a bastard." Victoria shrieked, her aristocratic mask completely slipping, revealing the ugly, elitist monster underneath. "He is a threat to everything we built." "He is a hunt," Logan corrected her, his voice dropping into a razor-sharp, chilling calm. "And his mother has enough power to buy and sell this entire family 10 times over. But more importantly, he is my son. And you are no longer my mother." Victoria gasped, her hand flying to her throat. "Logan, you can't mean that. I am the matriarch of this family. I built you." Logan pulled a secure satellite phone from his pocket and pressed a single button, placing it on speaker. The voice of the chief legal officer of Brody Holdings picked up instantly. "Sir? We are ready," the lawyer said, his voice tense. "Execute it," Logan commanded, his eyes never leaving his mother's terrified face. "Strip Victoria Brody of all board access. Revoke her power of attorney. Seize every trust fund, every offshore account, and every asset tied to the Brody corporate umbrella. Erect a permanent legal wall around her. And then, call the state prosecutor. Hand over the encrypted data showing her wire transfers to the Swiss mercenary firm. File charges for attempted kidnapping, conspiracy, and corporate espionage. Logan, no. You can't put your own mother in prison. Victoria screamed, throwing her hands out to grab his jacket, weeping openly now, her pride entirely broken. I am your mother. You will ruin the family. There is no family left, Victoria, Logan said, his voice entirely detached as he stepped back, letting her hands slide off his torn suit. You destroyed it 6 years ago when you made me throw away the woman I loved. And you buried it today when you targeted my child. Enjoy the mansion tonight. Tomorrow morning the state marshals will be here to escort you to a cell. He turned on his heel and walked away, leaving his mother collapsing onto her knees on the cold marble floor, her desperate weeping shrieks echoing through the empty, desolate halls of the estate. While Logan was systematically destroying his own empire to exact justice, an entirely different kind of despair had settled into the presidential suite of the Four Seasons. The tactical smoke had cleared and the broken glass had been swept away, but the atmosphere remained heavily fractured. Ellen sat on the edge of Leo's bed watching her son sleep. The little boy was exhausted from the trauma of the night, his small fingers still tightly gripping his stuffed bear. Every few minutes he would whimpering in his sleep and Ellen would gently smooth his hair, whispering words of comfort she didn't entirely believe herself. Julian stood by the door, his laptop open, his face tight with executive fatigue. The jet is fueled and cleared for takeoff at O'Hare, Julian said softly, breaking the silence. The security detail has secured a private hangar. We can leave for our estate in Zurich within the hour, Ellen. Here in Chicago, the threat matrix is too high. Logan's mother is a lunatic and Croft is still out there. It's no longer safe. Ellen didn't look up from her son's face. A profound, crushing weight sat on her chest. 6 years ago she had run away to protect her dignity. Tonight she was running away to protect her child's life. But as she looked at Leo's face, noticing the exact shape of his nose, the curve of his brow, she felt a deep, hollow ache. When the danger had been at its absolute peak, Logan hadn't hesitated. He had bled for them. He had taken a bullet, or rather a motorcycle, for her. And when his mother's treachery had been exposed, the look of absolute shattering betrayal on Logan's face had been entirely real. He hadn't been an accomplice. He had been a victim of his family's poison just as much as she had been. Ellen. Julian prompted gently, stepping closer. We need to go. The longer we stay, the more the paparazzi will catch wind of the security breach. The media blackout will fail. Ellen closed her eyes, a single heavy tear sliding down her cheek. She felt utterly separated from the life she had tried to build. She had wealth, she had power, she had her grandfather's empire. But as she looked out at the dark, rain-swept concrete of Chicago, she realized she was entirely alone in a fortress of her own making. The walls she had built to keep Logan out were now keeping her trapped in her own grief. Let's go, Julian, Ellen whispered, her voice sounding completely hollow, stripped of all its executive authority. Pack the bags. Let's take my son home. An hour later, a fleet of black armored vehicles moved through the heavy rain toward O'Hare International Airport. Inside the lead vehicle, Ellen held Leo tightly against her chest, her eyes fixed on the window. The city lights blurred into long weeping streaks of gold and red. She felt a strange, terrifying sense of finality. She was leaving Chicago forever. She would never return. Logan would never see his son again, and Leo would grow up knowing only the shadow of a father who had fought for him too late. Suddenly, the vehicle lurched violently. The brakes squealed as the armored SUV slammed to a sudden, jarring halt. Ellen instinctively threw her body over Leo, her heart jumping back into her throat. Not again, she thought in pure panic. Did Croft send more men? Report. What's happening? Julian shouted over the intercom to the front cabin. Ma'am. Sir. Someone is blocking the airport access road, the driver stammered, his voice filled with a bizarre mixture of awe and confusion. It's not an ambush. It's just one man. Ellen looked through the front windshield, her breath catching in her throat. Standing in the middle of the rain-drenched, desolate airport access road, Completely illuminated by the high-beam headlights of her armored caravan, was Logan. He wasn't in his SUV. He was on foot. He had no umbrella, no coat and no security detail. He stood alone in the freezing downpour, his white shirt completely soaked through, clinging to his heavily bandaged torso. The black stitches on his temple were visible under the bright lights, and his right arm hung entirely uselessly by his side, the brace soaked with rain and fresh crimson stains. He didn't move. He stood right in front of the massive multi-ton armored vehicle, using his own broken, bleeding body as a final desperate barricade to stop them from leaving. He looked straight through the windshield, his eyes wide, wild, and completely filled with an agonizing, desperate plea. He knew she was inside. He knew this was his last breath. "Julian, let me out," Ellen said, her voice dropping into an unyielding, breathless whisper. "Ellen, no. It's a trick or he's completely unstable," Julian argued, grabbing her arm. "We have a flight to catch." "Look at him, Julian," Ellen cried out, her voice breaking with an overwhelming surge of 6 years of buried emotion. "Does that look like a man playing games? Let me out." She threw the door open, stepping out into the freezing, lashing rain. The wind whipped her hair across her face, but she didn't care. She walked toward the front of the SUV, stopping just a few feet away from where Logan stood trembling in the headlights. "Logan, what are you doing?" Ellen screamed over the roar of the wind and the idling engines. "Are you insane? You're going to bleed to death out here. Get out of the way." Logan looked at her, his lips blue from the cold, his entire body shaking from a combination of shock, blood loss, and hypothermia. He took one ragged, unstable step forward, his boots splashing in the deep puddles. I processed the paperwork," Logan wheezed out, his voice barely audible over the storm, yet carrying an immense, crushing weight. He reached into his wet pocket with his left hand, pulling out a crumpled, rain-soaked legal document, holding it out to her like a man offering his own heart on a platter. "My mother, she's gone. The police are processing her now. She will never touch you or Leo again. And this is a total, unconditional surrender of Brody Holdings." Ellen froze, the rain pelting her face as she looked at the soaked papers. "What?" "I signed over 51% of my company to Hunt Enterprises," Logan choked out, a thick, bloody tear rolling down his cheek. "I gave up my voting rights. I gave up my chair. I stripped myself of everything. I don't care about the empire, Ellen. I don't care about the money. I couldn't let you leave thinking I was a part of that horror. I wanted to prove to you that I would give up everything I own just to ensure my son is safe. Even if you hate me forever, even if you never let me hold his hand, please, don't run away because of my bloodline. I tore it down. I tore it all down for you." His legs suddenly gave out. The sheer physical toll of his injuries, the blood loss, and the freezing cold finally broke his iron will. Logan collapsed heavily onto his knees in the middle of the wet asphalt, his head bowing, his useful hand dropping the legal papers into a puddle. He sat there in the rain, a broken, penniless, bleeding billionaire, entirely stripped of his pride, begging for nothing but her belief. The sight broke something fundamental deep inside Ellen's chest. The last remnant of her anger, the last piece of the fortress she had built over 6 long years, dissolved completely in the pouring rain. She saw him. She saw the true, authentic soul of the man who had loved her, the man who had been broken by his own past, and the man who was now literally dying on his knees to prove his love for their child. "My beautiful friends, we have reached the absolute darkest hour. Logan has completely dismantled his own life, arrested his own mother, and stripped himself of his entire fortune, collapsing in the freezing rain just to prove his love to Ellen." The lashing rain felt like ice against Ellen's skin, but she didn't feel the cold. The only thing she felt was the violent, irregular hammering of her own heart as she stared at Logan kneeling in the puddle before her. He looked completely unmade. This was the man who had once commanded the Chicago skyline with a single nod, a man whose arrogance had once made him seem like a god of the corporate world. Now he was a father stripped of his armor, shivering in the mud, offering up his entire life's work just to prove he wasn't the monster who had hurt her. For 6 years, Ellen had replayed their final boardroom argument in her head, using the memory of his cold, dismissive eyes as fuel to build her global empire. She had convinced herself that Logan Brody had no soul, that he was incapable of true, unselfish love. But as she looked at his bowed head, watching his blood mix with the rainwater pooling around his knees, the illusion shattered completely. A man who only cared about money didn't sign away his empire on a dark highway. A man who only cared about reputation didn't weep on his knees in front of a line of security guards. "Logan," Ellen whispered, her voice cracking as the last wall of her emotional fortress came tumbling down. She took a step forward, her expensive heels splashing through the puddles. Then, breaking into a frantic run, she threw herself onto the wet asphalt right beside him. She didn't care about her pristine clothes, her status as a global CEO, or the security guards watching in stunned silence. She reached out with both hands, wrapping them around Logan's ice-cold, soaking wet face, forcing him to lift his head. "Logan, look at me. Look at me," she cried out, her tears flowing hot and fast down her cheeks, mingling with the rain. Logan slowly opened his eyes, his vision heavily blurred by exhaustion and hypothermia. When he saw her face just inches from his, her eyes filled not with the icy disdain of a rival executive, but with the raw, fierce, deeply protective tenderness of the girl who had loved him 6 years ago, his breath caught in his throat. "Ellen," he wheezed, his blue lips trembling. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I threw away our life." "Hush, Logan. Just stop talking," Ellen sobbed, pressing her forehead against his wet temple, completely unbothered by the blood staining her hands. "I see you. I see what you did. You stopped her. You protected our boy. I don't care about the papers, Logan. I don't care about Brody Holdings. I just want you to live. I need you to be okay. You don't hate me?" Logan whispered, his voice incredibly weak, his left hand rising slowly to touch her cheek, his fingers trembling with a fragile hope. "I tried to hate you for 6 years, Logan," Ellen confessed, her voice thick with emotion as she squeezed his face. "But I couldn't. I couldn't ever truly stop loving you. When you threw yourself in front of that motorcycle, when you ripped yourself out of that hospital bed, I realized the man I loved was still in there. Your father, Logan. Leo needs you. We need you. Please don't leave us now." The words acted like a massive, life-saving jolt of electricity straight to Logan's failing heart. "We need you." He let out a ragged, choked sob, his forehead sinking against her shoulder as he let go of the last remnants of his defensive pride. He allowed himself to be held, allowed himself to be saved by the very woman he had cast aside. "Julian, get the paramedics out here right now." Ellen screamed over her shoulder, her voice ringing with an absolute command that brooked no delay. Julian, who had been watching the scene unfold from the shelter of the SUV, didn't hesitate. Whatever personal reservations he had about Logan Brody vanished when he saw the profound, authentic redemption happening in the middle of the highway. He flagged down the medical escort vehicle that had been tailing their caravan, and within seconds, emergency technicians flooded the asphalt with warm blankets and medical equipment. They gently lifted Logan onto a gurney, stabilizing his dislocated shoulder and wrapping his shivering frame in thermal silver blankets. Throughout the entire process, Logan's left hand remained locked with Ellen's, his fingers gripping hers with a desperate, unyielding strength, terrified that if he let go, she would vanish into the storm again. "I'm staying right here, Logan. I'm not leaving," Ellen promised softly, climbing into the back of the emergency vehicle right beside him, completely ignoring the rain-soaked mess of her appearance. Before the ambulance doors could close, a small, sleepy voice echoed from the front of the caravan. Julian was holding Leo, who had wrapped a warm blanket around his shoulders, his wide dark eyes peering into the back of the emergency vehicle. "Mommy? Is the brave mister going to be okay?" Leo asked, his voice filled with an innocent, profound concern for the man who had fought for him. Ellen looked from her beautiful son to Logan, whose eyes were filled with an overwhelming, tearful adoration as he looked at his child. She reached out, gently smoothing Logan's wet hair back from his stitched temple. "Yes, baby," Ellen said, her voice dropping into a beautiful, warm melody of hope and healing. "The brave mister is going to be perfectly fine. He's going to stay with us from now on. My beautiful global family, the ice has finally melted. In the middle of a freezing storm, Ellen and Logan have finally reunited, breaking through 6 years of pain, lies, and betrayal to find their way back to love. The turning point has been reached, and Logan has finally earned his place as a father. The transition from the frantic chaos of the highway to the high-security bunker of the Hunt family's private legal complex in downtown Chicago happened in a blur of tactical precision. By midnight, Logan had been stabilized by top private surgeons, his shoulder properly set, his ribs bound, and a fresh dose of heavy painkillers pumping through his veins. But he refused to stay in bed. Dressed in a clean charcoal gray Hunt security uniform, his left arm resting in a tight black sling, Logan stood side by side with Ellen in front of a massive wall of digital monitors. The battle for their son's future wasn't over yet. Victoria Brody had been neutralized, currently sitting in a cold holding cell facing federal kidnapping charges. But the true architect of the Shadow War, the predatory billionaire Thomas Croft, was still out there. And he was currently backed into a corner, desperate and highly dangerous. We just intercepted an encrypted data burst from Croft International's main server, Julian Vance announced, his fingers flying across a terminal as he brought up a live tracking map of a private airfield on the southern outskirts of Chicago. Croft knows the Swiss mercenary squad failed. He knows Victoria Brody is singing to the prosecutors to try and secure a plea deal. He's liquidating his assets and preparing to board his private Gulfstream to a non-extradition territory in South America. If he leaves American airspace, he escapes justice forever. He isn't going anywhere, Logan growled, his face hardening into an expression of pure, predatory focus. He looked at Ellen, a quiet, unspoken understanding passing between them. They were no longer the broken assistant and the paranoid boss of the past. They were a unified front, the two most powerful corporate minds in the country fighting for the absolute safety of their child. Julian, trigger the market protocol, Ellen commanded, her voice cold, level and radiating an immense multi-trillion-dollar authority. Logan has signed over 51% of Brody Holdings to us. Combine that with the full weight of Hunt Enterprises' capital reserves. We don't just sue Thomas Croft, we erase him from the global economy before his plane can even start its engines. Initiating the Hunt Brody short squeeze, Julian replied, a fierce smile spreading across his face as he struck the execution key on his terminal. What followed over the next 20 minutes was a masterclass in absolute financial execution. Using the combined wealth of both empires, Ellen and Logan launched a massive coordinated short attack on every publicly traded asset owned by Croft International. They dumped millions of shares simultaneously, triggering a catastrophic panic on the European pre-market exchanges. At the same time, Julian leaked the verified data logs linking Croft to the black market Swiss mercenary firm directly to the SEC and the international banking cartel. On the central monitor, Thomas Croft's net worth was displayed in a giant, bleeding red font. $4.2 billion. $2.8 billion. $900 million. $0. Within 12 minutes, Croft International was completely hollowed out, its stock price frozen by the exchange regulatory boards, and every domestic bank account tied to Thomas Croft's name permanently locked under emergency anti-terrorism funding provisions. He wasn't just ruined, he was financially paralyzed. He couldn't even pay for the fuel to get his private jet off the tarmac. The airfield security gate has just been breached by state marshals, Julian reported, zooming in on a live satellite feed of the private hangar. The screen showed a sleek black Gulfstream idling on the runway. Suddenly, a dozen tactical law enforcement vehicles flooded the tarmac, their sirens flashing red and blue against the wet asphalt. A tall, disheveled man in an expensive wool coat, Thomas Croft, stepped out of the hangar staircase, clutching a briefcase full of worthless bearer bonds. Before he could even reach the plane's boarding stairs, he was swarmed by armed marshals, forced face first onto the wet concrete, and slammed into heavy steel handcuffs. The central mystery, the danger, and the threats that had loomed over their lives for years were completely demolished in a matter of clicks. Justice had been delivered, swift and absolute. The high-security bunker fell into a peaceful, victorious silence. The red alerts on the monitors turned to a calm, steady green. Logan let out a long, ragged breath, the immense tension that had kept his muscles rigid for hours finally melting away. He turned to look at Ellen, his dark eyes filled with a profound, humbling admiration. She stood tall, her posture regal, yet as she looked back at him, the fierce mask dissolved, leaving behind the beautiful, warm woman he had fallen in love with 6 years ago. "It's over," Ellen whispered, a soft, radiant smile breaking across her face. Our son is safe, Logan. No one can ever touch him again. Thank you, Ellen, Logan said, his voice thick with an intense, raw emotion. He stepped closer to her, his left hand rising to gently touch the edge of her jaw, his fingers trembling with a deep, reverent love. For trusting me. For letting me fight for him. And for you. I don't deserve the grace you've shown me today. You bled for us, Logan, Ellen murmured, leaning her face into his warm palm, her eyes shining with tears of pure relief and happiness. You proved who you really are when the world was burning. You didn't just save Leo. You saved yourself from the poison your family built around you. You are a good man, Logan Brody. And you are going to be an incredible father. Before Logan could answer, the door to the legal complex suite clicked open. Julian walked in, leading Leo by the hand. The little boy had been kept completely safe and oblivious to the economic war that had just unfolded, his small face bright and rested. The moment Leo saw Logan standing there, his eyes lit up with a brilliant, joyous recognition. He broke away from Julian and came running across the room, his small sneakers squeaking against the floor. Brave mister! Leo cheered. Logan didn't care about his cracked ribs, his bound shoulder, or his surgical stitches. He immediately dropped to both knees, opening his left arm wide. Leo flew straight into his embrace, wrapping his small arms tightly around Logan's neck. Logan pulled his son against his chest, burying his face into the boy's soft curls, weeping openly as a profound chemical bond of fatherhood locked into place forever. I've got you, buddy, Logan sobbed, his voice breaking with a joy so immense it felt like it would burst from his chest. I've got you. I'm never letting you go. Ellen stepped forward, kneeling down right beside them, wrapping her own arms around both Logan and Leo, completing the circle. The three of them sat in the center of the room, held tightly together in a warm, unbreakable embrace. A family once brutally broken by pride and wealth, now completely redeemed, healed, and united in the powerful fire of unconditional love. My beautiful, amazing global family, absolute triumph has been achieved. The enemies have been utterly destroyed, Thomas Croft is in handcuffs, and Logan is finally holding his beautiful son in his arms with Ellen by his side. This is the raw, powerful justice and love we have been fighting for. 6 months later, the cold, unforgiving concrete of Chicago had been replaced by the breathtaking, sun-drenched hills of Tuscany. The private Hunt family estate sat nestled amidst rolling vineyards and blooming olive groves, its ancient stone walls radiating a timeless warmth under the golden Italian sun. The air was sweet with the scent of lavender, fresh-baked bread, and the distant joyful sound of a child's laughter echoing through the gardens. On the grand stone veranda overlooking the valley, a long wooden table was beautifully dressed for an early evening feast. Ellen stood near the edge of the terrace, a glass of white wine resting loosely in her fingers. She wore a simple, elegant sundress that danced softly in the warm Mediterranean breeze, her face radiant with a peace she hadn't known in nearly a decade. The hypervigilant defensive armor of the global corporate titan had completely melted away, leaving behind a woman who felt utterly safe, completely fulfilled and deeply, truly loved. From the grassy lawn below, a sharp burst of pure, unadulterated giggling broke her gaze. Ellen looked down to see Logan sprinting through the vineyard rows, carrying Leo high on his broad shoulders. Logan had completely transformed over the last 6 months. The hard, calculating lines of his face had softened into a stunning, relaxed, handsome look. He was dressed casually in a linen shirt, his sleeves rolled up, his dark eyes sparkling with an intense, vibrant joy. His right arm was completely healed, fully functional as he swung Leo down from his shoulders and swept him into a gentle, playful tackle onto a patch of soft clover. I got you, champion. Logan roared playfully, tickling the little boy's stomach until Leo was completely breathless from laughing. Mommy, save me. Daddy is too strong. Leo shrieked happily, his small face crinkling into that beautiful, unmistakable dimple on his left cheek, the exact mirror image of his father's. Daddy. Every single time that word left Leo's lips, a warm, overwhelming wave of emotion crashed through Ellen's chest. The transition hadn't happened overnight, but with infinite patience, absolute humility, and a daily commitment to proving his devotion, Logan had earned his son's heart. He didn't buy Leo's love with toy stores or corporate trust funds. He earned it by sitting on the floor building Lego sets for hours, by holding Leo's hand during thunderstorms, and by reading bedtime stories until his voice went hoarse. Logan looked up toward the veranda, catching Ellen's soft, adoring gaze. His face instantly lit up with a deep, reverent warmth. He gave Leo a gentle pat on the back, sending him off to play with Julian, who was sitting near the garden pavilion reading a book, always a loyal and protective guardian to the family. Logan walked up the stone steps of the veranda, his eyes never leaving Ellen's face. He stepped into her personal space, completely unbothered by the fact that he was covered in grass stains and dirt. He reached out with his strong hands, gently wrapping his arms around her waist and pulling her body flush against his chest. "You look breathtaking, Mrs. Brody Hunt," Logan whispered, his voice deep, smooth and vibrating with an intense, unwavering devotion. "And you look like you just got tackled into a bush by a 5-year-old, Ellen teased gently, a beautiful, brilliant smile breaking across her lips as she reached up to loop her arms around his neck, running her fingers through his dark curls. "I'd take 1,000 tackles from him every single day for the rest of my life," Logan murmured sincerely, his dark eyes dropping to look at her lips before returning to her eyes. He leaned down, pressing his forehead against hers, his breath warm against her skin. "6 months ago I was on my knees in a rainstorm, entirely prepared to die unloved and broken. Today, I am standing in paradise, holding the woman who saved my soul, watching my son grow. I am the richest man in the world, Ellen, and it has absolutely nothing to do with a bank account." "We built this paradise together, Logan," Ellen softly replied, her fingers tracing the faded, neat scar near his temple, the permanent mark of the day he had proven his love with his life. "The past is gone. Your mother will never leave that federal facility, Thomas Croft's empire is dust, and our companies are thriving under a unified, ethical banner. There are no more secrets. No more fear. Just us. Just us," Logan vowed softly. He leaned down the remaining fraction of an inch, his lips meeting hers in a deep, lingering and exquisitely tender kiss. It was a kiss that carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken apologies, the fire of an unyielding passion, and the beautiful absolute promise of a shared future. Ellen melted into his touch, her heart overflowing with a profound, beautiful peace. The girl who had once been a rejected, broken-hearted assistant had returned as a queen, and she had successfully redeemed the king who had cast her aside. Down in the garden, Leo noticed his parents kissing and let out a loud, dramatic groan, covering his eyes with his stuffed bear. "You, Mommy and Daddy are doing the mushy stuff again." Logan and Ellen broke the kiss, laughing warmly as they turned together, their arms wrapped tightly around each other's waists, looking out over the golden Tuscan valley. The sun was slowly sinking below the horizon, painting the sky in a breathtaking tapestry of brilliant crimson, violet, and gold. The beautiful dawn of a brand new beginning for a family that had survived the storm, conquered the shadows, and finally found their way home to love. "My beautiful, incredible, wonderful global family, we have finally reached the absolute end of this deeply emotional, addictive journey. Our beautiful protagonists have claimed their absolute victory, healed their wounds, and built a stunning paradise of love, redemption, and peace. Justice was served and love conquered all. From the bottom of my heart, I want to say an immense, overflowing thank you to each and every one of you for staying with me until the very last sentence. Your support means the absolute world to me. Please, take a final moment right now to leave a beautiful comment below sharing your favorite part of this epic story. Did you love Logan's ultimate redemption? Let me know. And if you haven't already, please hit that subscribe button, smash the like button, and share this video with someone who loves a beautiful, emotional romance. I love you all so incredibly much. Stay safe, stay happy, and I will see you in our next gripping story. Goodbye for now, my wonderful family.